So, like I said, I want to get into the first topic of this podcast. Breaking news, and this happened maybe a couple days ago as of this recording. Um, Tyron Woodley is stepping in instead of Tommy Fury. According to Tommy Fury, he had a rib injury, which he didn't know of for about like 4 weeks or so. He thought it was some sort of flu. He thought it was some sort of bacterial infection. He wasn't sure what exactly it was. But then after talking to his doctors, after getting some x-rays done, he found out that he had injured and broken one of his ribs. A lot of people are, posting this one video of Tyson Fury, the older heavyweight champion brother of Tommy, throwing a medicine ball on his ribs and saying, "Hey, there you go. We found the culprit. We found the exact video, the exact time, the exact place that this injury may have been sustained." And that's just one of many times that I'm sure that they did that exercise. I think the one time that Tyson Fury was there and actually helping out and throwing the medicine ball, that was the one that they recorded, and they're like, "Look at this, how much of an idiot this guy is. Why is he training like this? This is crazy. Doesn't he know that he's got a massive payday in front of him, and why would he be training like this?" And I think that this is nearsighted. This is not doing research. This is just coming to conclusions as quickly as possible. We all know that this is a very common thing that boxers do. It might not be the right thing to do to condition that abdomen and to be able to take shots. It might not be the best. It might not be, what actually works. It might just be for that mental edge. Who knows? But we all know that boxers do this all the time. MMA fighters do this all the time. They throw that medicine ball to the abs. They even get punched there. They like conditioning that area, and it's a very common tactic for combat sport athletes to do something like this. So I don't think that people should come to conclusion, should automatically say like, "Oh my God, like, this guy's crazy. He blew the biggest bag um, possible." I think the next thing that we have to talk about when it comes to this fight is the pressure that either Jake Paul or Tyron Woodley has when stepping into something like this. I think that this has a lot of pressure for both of these fighters. This adds a bunch of pressure to Jake Paul. It adds a bunch of pressure to Tyron Woodley. And the reason why I'm saying this is because Jake Paul, who's already beaten this guy, thought that he already went over this hump against going against the UFC former welterweight champion. This is a big step for him, and I'm sure that he was relieved at the end of it. And now that he has to do it again, it just adds a lot of pressure on him to one up himself. He said it himself, and he's talked about it, that he is willing and wrote it in the contract that he would give $500,000 to Tyron Woodley if he knocked him out in this fight. Now, Tyron Woodley says that he's been training for a while. He's ready for this fight. He's ready for this opponent. Many people are speculating that, and myself included, that I believe he was planning on fighting the ex-UFC fighter / commentator Dan Hardy, and he was going to fight him in a boxing match, and I'm sure it was going to be promoted by Triller, because Triller, with their triad combat, is another thing that we didn't talk about, is the triad combat, and Frank Mir getting taken out in that, and I think a bunch of the rest of the MMA fighters made a good case for themselves. But Tyron Woodley was training for that fight against Dan Hardy. Dan Hardy was interested in fighting again after getting his medical uh, medicals done, and everybody saying that he's ready to fight again. So I think that this is a great opportunity for Woodley to really redeem himself. But this is just gonna. I mean, the one thing is, if we get that Tyron Woodley of old, it's going to be a massive problem for Jake Paul. Now, we got to remember the age of Tyron Woodley. We got to remember the way that he's been fighting his last couple of fights, the way that he won the belt, and I think this all comes back to that, is by conserving energy, looking for his spots, looking for his openings. And that's how he originally won the belt. That's how he originally, how it clicked for him. And I think that's just something that he's brought to the rest of his career. The fact is that he has that in the back of his mind, that he waits for his shots, waits for his openings. This is all stuff that brought him that UFC welterweight championship. The greatest example of this is after he won it, he had those couple fights with Wonderboy Thompson. Now, in that fight, you're facing one of the greatest strikers in the UFC and in UFC history. With that kind of fighter, with that kind of athleticism that Wonderboy has, with that kind of quickness, you have to be careful in a fight like that. And the way that he won was by really staying on the outside, waiting for his shots, trying to go for takedowns, but having a calculated game plan and not throwing loose punches that could be easily countered. Like I said before, the quickness of Wonderboy really brought down that temptation. And I think that taught him a lesson that might be to his detriment now, is the patience and all that kind of stuff, and not throwing. That's the main issue that Tyron Woodley has to face in this next fight. And if he loses again, I believe his aspirations to become a pro boxer kind of go out the window, because you can't lose 2 fights to Jake Paul and then have aspirations to either fight an MMA again or, like he said before, make his mark in boxing. It just can't happen. I mean, no one's going to take you seriously after this. I know that Jake Paul, his skills are developing and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, you're a pro fighter who's fighting a YouTuber with a lot of money, albeit, and at the end of the day, you just can't lose 2 fights to Jake Paul and expect amazing things to happen in the rest of your career. I think for Jake Paul, honestly, this is an amazing opportunity for him. I mean, he feels the pressure. It's going to be tough because you don't know. Again, maybe Tyron Woodley is the old Tyron Woodley. Maybe the UFC welterweight champion, the former champion, comes out to play that night. And you have this aggressive fighter who goes for all of the openings, won't give you a break. You know, I rewatched some of the fight, and you could see at some points that Tyron Woodley could have really stepped on the gas, you know, especially when he had Jake against the ropes. He could have really gone for broke at that moment. We all know that he has a punching power. That's one of the last things to go on any fighter, boxing or MMA. And he could have used that against Jake. And I'll give Jake all the credit. He was elusive. He had that game plan set in motion when it comes to that fight. He knew who he was fighting. He did the research, and he really put in the time, money, and effort to beating a former UFC welterweight champion. One of the greatest of all time. And I think we're all forgetting that. Even if Tyron Woodley loses, we shouldn't forget the fact of how special he was when he was in the UFC. And I really think that this is going to tarnish his career if he loses twice. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, because you could do all the amazing stuff you want, but at the end of your career, that's what people are going to remember the most. Look at Georges St. Pierre. The amazing stuff that he's done inside and outside of the octagon has been in parallel. And what I mean by that is that he does amazing stuff outside. He does amazing stuff inside the octagon. And we remember him as one of the greatest of all time. But then we look at a fighter like BJ Penn, who's done amazing stuff equally, but because of his outside of the cage antics and some of the trouble that he's been getting in, and these are obviously two different things, but even BJ Penn later in his career, fighting people like Ryan Hall, who almost toyed with him, really affected the way that we look at him now. And that's just due to the fact that, people aren't going to go back and do the research. They're just going to see what did this guy do in his latest fight. And they're going to see you lost to Jake Paul twice. You lost to Ryan Hall. They're going to see what the latest thing was in your resume. And that's the one thing that you got to be really careful of. Really, really careful of. I'm excited for this fight. I hope that Tommy Fury gets better. I want to see that fight with Jake Paul. I think both of them are almost tailor-made for Jake Paul. Jake Paul, if he fights Tommy Fury, and when he does, I think it's an eventuality at this point. The thing was almost signed and they were about to do the damn thing. But Tommy Fury talks like a fighter. He hangs around with fighters, but is he really a fighter? When he fought the Bellator fighter who was around 155 pounds, he was having a tough time getting him out of there. He ended up winning the fight by decision, but he wasn't able to take him out. And we're talking about someone that fights around cruiserweight, and he was fighting someone that in MMA fought around 155 or 145. And it's just really tough to even I think both Woodley and Tommy Fury are perfectly made to fight Jake Paul and to give Jake Paul that test, but it should be one of those ones that he should always pass. So I think that's an interesting one. It's a fun topic to talk about.